Chapter 791 Human Rituals. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Standing at the edge of the VIP area that loomed above the dance floor of a popular nightclub, Sunny and Nephice looked down at the undulating mass of human bodies below them with strange expressions. The music thundered and reverberated from all sides, making the whole space vibrate. The darkness was filled with flashes of light and glowing figures of elaborate moving projections. People were having the time of their lives. The club Effie had brought them to was an exclusive and luxurious establishment that only the members of the elite classes of human society could visit. The amount of credits being spent every minute on exotic alcoholic beverages and legal stimulants was nothing short of astronomical. The value of designer clothes, cutting-edge tech accessories, and precious jewelry present in the dance hall was almost revolting. The bestial excitement permeating the air was almost palpable. Staring at the mass of dancing humans in bewilderment, Sunny shook his head. What a strange ritual. Nephice turned her head slightly and raised an eyebrow. That I know, right? The members of the cohort were occupying a large part of the VIP lounge intended for the most distinguished patrons of the club. Even among the mass of elites, their status was a cut above the rest. Kai and Cassie were enjoying something called champagne at the table, while the other three moved to the edge to take a look at the main hall of the club. Changing Star peered at the dancing crowd and frowned. Their behavior doesn't make any sense. Sunny nodded in solidarity. Indeed. After a while, he added. They're not even dancing, they're just rhythmically gyrating their bodies. It also appears that the proximity at which one is allowed to gyrate his or her body to other participants is representative of their desirability. Anyway, they all look incredibly stupid. Nephice tilted her head a little. It is not that simple, I think. This strange dynamic actually seems to be very nuanced. Just look at the women, they seem to be using their looks, physical coordination, and agility in order to attract the men. However, once men are attracted, the women act as if they are disinterested. Most of the time they truly are, other times it is just a signal for the men to try harder. She grew silent, and then added with slight confusion. The most startling part is that all this information, including the complicated evaluations based on obscure parameters and much more, is communicated absolutely non-verbally and in a way that both men and women somehow seem to understand while chaotically jerking their bodies. It is like they all develop telepathic abilities. Sunny scowled. Anyway, these gyrations are clearly meant to illustrate one's high value as a romantic partner. And that is what this dance is, a venue for the dancers to seek out physically desirable partners. However, everyone acts as if it's not. In fact, most of these people are pretending that the exact opposite is true. He rubbed his chin. As if showing interest is in itself an admission of inadequacy and undesirability. Those who do manage to find partners do it through a series of obscure hints and silent signals. This is so inefficient. Why can't people just honestly state their goals and desires? They are all pursuing the same result, anyway. Changing Star nodded thoughtfully. Effie, who was leaning on the railing near them, stared at the two of them with a perplexed expression. Then, the huntress slowly shook her head. You are both idiots, you know that. Sunny and Nephice looked at her with surprise, their movement almost simultaneous. What? Why? Is this analysis wrong? Effie let out an exasperated sigh. They are just having fun. Gods, don't you know what fun is? Believe it or not, it's just pleasurable to let loose and move your body to loud music sometimes. Actually, you should try it. A very similar expression of subdued revulsion appeared on both of their faces. No, thank you. I'd rather not. The huntress rolled her eyes. As for that stuff about seeking partners, what's wrong with that? Other things can be pleasurable too, you know. Both Sunny and Nephice blinked. How frivolous. Of course, I do. Don't I know it well? Effie groaned and grabbed her head. Hopeless, both of them. After a few moments, she sighed, then looked at Nephi's and asked. Well, anyway. This is a perfect example of what humans like to do. Is it working? Do you feel better connected to humanity? Changing Star hesitated, then looked back at the mass of dancing people and remained silent for a while. Then, she said. It is strange. To see so many people, acting so, carelessly. To be honest, all I can think about. Her face turned somber. Nephis lingered for a moment as she studied the crowd with a dark expression. That is how easy it would be to kill them all. They are just so unaware, and unprepared. After long years of living in a state of constant pain and struggle, desperately trying to survive and fighting harrowing enemies almost every day, it must have been hard for her to come to terms with this strange, peaceful reality. Neph might have returned to the waking world, but her mentality was slow to adjust. It was still in the dreadful grasp of the dream realm. Mentally, Changing Star was still living in a nightmare. Effie looked at her with a dubious frown. You would be surprised. This is an expensive club, so a lot of these people are awakened. In fact, I'd say that places like these have a higher concentration of awakened than pretty much anywhere else in the city, except for the academy. This club is better suited to resist a sudden gate manifestation than the headquarters of most legacy clans. Neph glanced at her with surprise. Really? The huntress grinned. Of course. Not all awakened are obsessed with fighting like the two of you. They treat the dream realm as their job, not their whole existence. While they sleep, they perform their duties, man the walls, fight the attacking nightmare creatures, maintain their citadels, and so on. When they wake up, they go about their actual lives. Chapter 792 Blind Spot. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Effie smiled, then gestured at the dancing crowd and added. After they return from the dream realm, most awakened spend at least a part of their day training to raise their usefulness to the Citadel and increase their chances of survival. Some have important jobs to perform in the waking world, as well. Our infrastructure runs on spell tech, after all. She shook her head. But other than that, here's plenty of time to live and have fun. It doesn't have to be all work, without stop. Some might even say that not having any other interests is detrimental. The huntress looked at them and shrugged. I mean, how can you be motivated to fight for this world if you never experience all the nice things that it has to offer? Maybe that is why your counselor told you to participate in mundane human activities, Neph. Awakened and especially masters like us need to anchor ourselves to humanity, somehow. But there's no gateways here. Sunny took a sniff of the strange sparkling liquid in his glass, then carefully tasted it. This champagne, or whatever it was called, was way too expensive for him to pass the chance of getting his money's worth out of it. Well, he wasn't paying today, but still. It was a matter of principle. Of course, Sunny had sworn off alcohol, but with him being a master now, there was no way for him to get drunk unless he wanted to. Not because of mundane drinks like this one, anyway. Unless he consciously willed otherwise, his body was going to treat alcohol as a weak poison and resist it. Tastes, sweet. But also bitter. Very refreshing, though. How strange. Effie's words made him thoughtful. She was not entirely wrong. Sunny himself felt a bit ambivalent about the waking world, which had not been kind to him in the past. He only liked it better than the dream realm because it was safer and had nice things, like delicious food, comfortable furniture, and network dramas. Also, Rain was here. But what if an awakened was indifferent to all those things? Would they even feel compelled to do anything to protect the waking world? What was going to stop them from abandoning the mundane completely after they became a master or a saint? Or a sovereign? Nephis, meanwhile, continued to study the dance hall. After a while, she said. Eddie, there might be many awakened here, but how prepared are they to fight against a flood of nightmare creatures? It takes a lot of courage to face an opening gate. Out of those who are courageous, how many are competent enough to make a difference? Not everyone is like Mongrel. Very few can stand their ground and fight. Effie gave her a strange look. Ha! Have you been watching a lot of videos on the network, Princess? You are quoting Mongrel now. Changing Star shrugged. I just find him admirable. The huntress suddenly grinned and said in a conspiratorial tone. Neff, do you maybe have a crush on Lord Mongrel? Sonny almost spat out his champagne. He turned slightly and threw a murderous glance at Effie. Nephise, however, remained nonchalant. She showed no reaction, and simply said. I just appreciate his skill and his integrity. At first, I was merely attracted by how beautiful his swordsmanship is. Flowing, unpredictable. Supremely adaptable. I watched a few of his duels, as well as his performances in the Dream Tournament. His dedication, versatility, and domineering attitude left a deep impression on me. Changing Star shook her head. But those were just games. It was only when I stumbled on a clip of Mongrel single-handedly stalling several waves of nightmare creatures in front of a gate that I truly grew to appreciate his character. In my opinion, he is what a true awakened should strive to be. Someone who is not resigned to bowing down to the spell, and is determined to resist it instead. His will, mastery of combat, and wisdom are commendable. It warms my heart to know that there are warriors like him out there. Sonny gripped his glass and forced out an awkward smile. Hey, let's not go overboard about that Mongrel guy, shall we? He's not that great. I mean, he was not really alone at that gate, there were other awakened helping him. As for all that wisdom stuff, I am willing to bet that he did not mean any of the crap he said. Nephise looked at him with surprise. I disagree. I think that Mongrel deserves all the praise. He is truly remarkable. Effie, meanwhile, were looking at them with a grin. Sonny suddenly got a bad feeling. Before he could say something, however, the huntress leaned forward and whispered into Neff's ear. You do know that Sonny is Mongrel, right? Sonny choked on his champagne. The exquisite glass cracked slightly in his hand. Nephise froze. Her face remained still as ever. However, despite the dim lighting of the nightclub, he could swear there was a hint of pink slowly appearing on her cheeks. Was she blushing? Damned Effie. I'll kill her. Changing Star remained silent for a while, then said in her usual even tone. Of course. I definitely knew that. She straightened her back, and then added. I was just commenting on his perceived accomplishments. Now, if you'll excuse me. I need to visit the restroom. She glanced at Sonny and Effie with a deadpan expression, then turned around and walked away. Her pace was calm and steady. Not rushed at all. Effie waited for a few moments, then threw her head back and exploded in laughter. Oh, gods. Doesn't make any sense, so inefficient. I can't with these two. Sonny glared at her with murder in his eyes. He remained silent for a few moments, then said softly. Hey, Effie. She looked at him with a wide grin. What, doofus? He sighed, then rotated his shoulders a few times. Do you have a will? The huntress blinked a couple of times. Sure. I made one before the second nightmare. Why? Sonny looked at her and smiled politely. Oh, no reason. No reason at all. Chapter 793 Memories of the Future. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Effie wisely chose that moment to disappear and join the dancing crowd below. Sonny ground his teeth for a few moments, then shook his head and walked to the table, landing on a luxurious lounge chair with a sigh. Kai briefly glanced at him and smiled. Where are Effie and Lady Nephise? Sonny stared at him for a few moments, then looked away. Effie went to dance. Neff is in the bathroom. Also, will you cut it out with the lady stuff? The two of you spent months traversing the forgotten shore together, back when we were returning from the Hollow Mountains. She is also younger than you. That is more than enough to drop the formalities, don't you think? The archer coughed. Oh. Well. I'll try. He didn't sound very convincing, forcing Sonny to roll his eyes. Anyway, what do we have here? At some point, a waiter had entered the lounge and placed a tray of various foods on the table. While trying very hard not to throw reverent looks at the distinguished guests. Knowing that there would be no chance for him to taste anything once Effie returned, Sonny used the opportunity to try a few. As he chewed on a piece of cheese that had been dipped into a sweet, viscous amber liquid, Sonny smiled in delight and asked. Wow! What's that sugary syrup? Cassie turned to him, then smelled the air. I think it's honey. Sonny blinked a couple of times. The word was familiar, but he usually heard it used as a term of endearment. Who knew that it had actually come from something this delicious? What is honey, though? The blind girl tilted her head a little, then said with a bit of surprise in her voice. Well, it is. A sort of liquid that special insects produce by ingesting and regurgitating floral nectar. I guess. Sonny froze, grew a little pale, and slowly pushed the cheese plate away from himself. That I see. I see. Good to know. With that, he gulped a mouthful of champagne and tried to discreetly rinse his mouth. Sonny was never picky about his food. He had even sustained himself on raw, rotting mimic meat for an entire month once. But even he had his limits. Damned rich people, what are they going to come up with next? Soon, Nephis returned. She was acting as if nothing had happened, and her face was perfectly composed. However, there was a hint of confusion in her eyes. As she sat down, Kai hesitated for a moment, and then said. You seem concerned. Did anything happen, Nephis? Changing Star paid no attention to the lack of lady, and simply shook her head. Nothing. I just overheard a bit of a strange conversation on my way back. Apparently, there is a little snack here in the VIP lounge that those women would want to taste. Odd. Why wouldn't they just order it themselves? Well, maybe it is not on the common menu. Sonny glanced at the small bowl of honey with disgust and sneered. If they want it, they can have it. I have no objections. They are free to gobble it up, as far as I'm concerned. Ignoring a strange glance from Kai, Sonny took a sip of champagne and relaxed a little. That was the point of today's outing, anyway. After days of serving as a punching bag for an untrained master, he deserved some rest. Soon enough, Effie returned. The huntress was practically beaming with delight. She quickly destroyed most of their food, poured herself a drink, and grinned. This is fun. We should go out more often. Sonny and Nephis looked at her in horror, while Kai nodded. Indeed. It's just a shame that they don't have live music. Effie, meanwhile, looked around with a bit of curious expression. This is strange, though. I never imagined living like this. I mean, my goal was always to become a master. But now that I did, everything seems a little surreal. The archer smiled wistfully. Yes, life is full of surprises, isn't it? Before the Forgotten Shore, I had a clear picture of what my future would look like. Then, for years, I tried not to think about the future at all. And now that I reached that future, it's not like what I thought it would be. Not even a little bit. Cassie let out a small sigh. Me too. When I look back on my younger self and think about what she expected from the future, I can't believe how naive and short-sighted she was. She feels like a stranger. A few gazes fell on Sonny. He raised his eyebrow, and then said. What? This is exactly how I imagined my life would go, actually. After I returned from the first nightmare, I thought that I would soon be a full citizen, super rich, and have unlimited access to tasty food. So I don't know what you're talking about. For me, everything went according to plan. Effie rolled her eyes, and then glanced at Nephis. What about you, princess? Changing Star lingered for a moment, then shrugged. I am exactly where I expected to be, too. Of course, the details are different. But the result is the same. Legacies don't really have a choice in these matters. Sunny suddenly became curious. I heard that all children of legacy clans are inevitably infected by the nightmare spell. There is just no chance for them to remain mundane. Is this true? If so, why? What is so special about your kind? Nephis took a sip of champagne, thought for a moment, and said calmly. There is nothing special about legacies, as far as one's chances of becoming infected go. We are not inherently predisposed to awaken, unlike what many people believe. There are just certain measures that a clan can undertake to make sure that its heirs do. Sunny blinked a couple of times. Like what? Neff looked at him evenly. It is simple, really. The parents of a legacy child just have to implore for assistance from a saint. That is why lesser clans always seek to ally themselves with more powerful ones. The child is brought to the dream realm, and then returned to the clan. This way, the seed is already planted in their soul. Once they come of age, it is inevitable for the seed to bloom, and bring them to the first nightmare. Sunny frowned, feeling something strange about her phrasing. Seed. As in, the seed of nightmare. Changing Star calmly nodded. Of course. The first nightmare is not different from all the rest. It is also born from a seed. It is just that this seed does not grow in the dream realm. Instead, it grows in a human soul. Have you never thought why there are no gates of the first category? Well, there are, of course. Every aspirant that fails their first nightmare becomes a miniature gate, allowing a single nightmare creature to enter the waking world. That is why their corpses turn into monsters. Chapter 794 Adulthood. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. The sudden revelation brought the mood down for a few minutes. Sunny silently drank his champagne, thinking about what Neff had just said. It made a lot of sense, in a dark and disturbing way. It also shed some light on how the spell chose its victims. He doubted that a seed of nightmare, no matter how small, could bloom in just any soul. It probably required fertile soil to take root. Of course, in this ravaged world, there were plenty of broken and traumatized people whose souls could nurture a nightmare seed. It had been even more so 50 years ago, when the spell first appeared. Had the collective anguish and torment of those lucky few who had survived the dark times summoned it from whatever hell the spell existed in, ushering the rise of the first generation of the awakened and everything that followed? He did not know, and doubted that he would find out any time soon, if ever. Nevertheless, there was another interesting hint in what Nephis had explained to them. If legacies wanted their children to inherit the mantle, and only saints could ensure that the poor kids would be doomed to either awaken or die, then saints held even more power among the legacy clans than he had thought. And who were the first saints of humanity? Asterion, Ki Song, Anvil of Vale, and Broken Sword. They were the first, and at some point the only people who all legacy clans had to befriend if they wanted to ensure that their bloodlines continued walking on the path of ascension. Was that, perhaps, the initial reason that had elevated the great clans above all the rest? Interesting. He was not in the mood to ponder the origins of power that the sovereigns held, however. Thinking about the great clans made him feel sour. Since today was Sunny's day off, he chased the weary thoughts away and tried to enjoy his drink instead. Cassie, meanwhile, said with a deep frown. Isn't it too cruel, to subject your children to such fate? And without even giving them a choice. Only 1 out of 3 aspirants survives the first nightmare. Of course, that strongly depends on how well prepared they are, so the number should be less gruesome among the legacies. But, still, what kind of parent would do something like that to their child? Nephice lingered for a while, then sighed. It all depends on your point of view. Sure, it might seem cruel to some. But some might see it as giving their child a chance to grow strong in a world that is not kind to the powerless. Legacies are a warrior caste, at their core. They were born from a ruthless war, one that almost destroyed all of humanity. I can understand why they value strength and duty above all else. All that talk about parents and children brought Sonny into a dark mood. He was 20 now, he was more or less an adult. In fact, he was already older than his mother had been when she had him. This realization made him feel very strange. Sonny stared into his glass for a few minutes with a grim expression, then sighed and stood up. I'll be back in a few. With that, he left his friends and went away in search of a bathroom. In truth, he just wanted to be alone for a bit. Soon, he was staring at his reflection as the water was running from an exquisite brass faucet. The young man staring at him from the mirror did not seem amused. Sonny frowned, thinking about whether Mordred was hiding somewhere in the mirror. It had become a habit of his to consider such things from time to time. Luckily, this time, the Prince of Nothing seemed to be nowhere to be found. Sonny sighed in relief, and then left the bathroom to return to the VIP lounge. On his way, however, he encountered a small disturbance. A group of young men and women were blocking his way, discussing something with one of the club's employees in loud voices. Their clothes looked extremely expensive, and their appearance was impeccably high-class. As he came closer, he heard the most extravagant looking member of the group saying with outrage. "What do you mean, you can't let us inside? This is our usual spot. I can see from here that there's plenty of room left in the lounge. The beautiful ladies inside wouldn't mind some company, I'm sure. Actually, I am willing to bet that my friend and I can show them far greater time than their present companion." The hostess looked at him and said in an awkward tone. "Sir. I am very sorry, but the whole VIP lounge was reserved by the esteemed guests." The young man scoffed. "Esteemed guests? Do you even know who I am? I sincerely doubt that anyone in this ramshackle parlor of yours has more esteem than I." Sonny sighed, approached the group of young people, and patted the loudmouth on the shoulder. The young men looked down in confusion, then frowned. "I suggest you unhand me, friend, what do you want?" Sonny smiled. "Relax, buddy. I just want to give you a small piece of advice." He hugged the young man with one arm, turned him to face the VIP lounge, and pointed at Nephice, Cassie, Effie, and Kai, who could barely be seen from that spot. "Do you see these people? Do you know who they are?" The loudmouth scowled, then thought for a moment and asked with curiosity. "Oh, you know these beauties. Who are they?" Sonny's grin grew wider. "Well, let me tell you. They are all experienced murderers and killers. I once saw the tall one tear a fallen beast apart, devour its meat, and gnaw on its bones. The pretty guy next to her used to be nice, but after being burned alive and having his skin replaced with primitive grafts by an unlicensed medical practitioner, he developed some strange ideas. That delicate blonde girl is actually the most terrifying. There are 50 powerful awakened that follow her around like lost puppies and eat from the palm of her hand, all willing to obey her commands. Every one of them is a maniac. That stunning, incredible beauty next to her, boy, I don't even know where to start. She was contemplating killing everyone in this club just half an hour ago. Luckily, we managed to distract her." With each word, the young man grew paler and paler. His friends were suddenly silent, too. When Sonny was done speaking, the loudmouth nervously looked at the pale hand that was resting on his shoulder, and asked in a small voice. And who might you be?" Sonny smiled brilliantly. "Me. Oh, I live with two of these girls. I have a nice house, you know, with very special facilities, of the underground kind, if you know what I mean. The third, I had to spend almost a month locked in a cage with that one. Gods, that was rough. As for the skin.graft guy, he drives me around. The young man turned slightly green, then gently moved Sonny's hand off his shoulder and backed away. I.S.C. Thank you very much for the advice, Fr., sir. On second thought, we should be going. My, oh my, look at the time. His group suddenly disappeared, as if they had never been there in the first place. Sonny looked at the hostess and shrugged. Well, whatever. By the way, we're out of snacks. Could you bring us some more? Just, no honey, please, BDNV. Chapter 795 Moment of Peace. You are listening at novelfull.audio. To Sonny's absolute shock, nothing really happened for the rest of the night. There was no deadly brawl that forced the cohort to intervene, no emissary of the great clans arrived to crash the party, no gate opened right in front of the club. He had been fully prepared for something to go terribly wrong, but in the end, nothing did. How odd. The five masters simply had a good time listening to loud music, being served delicious drinks and food, and enjoying each other's company. Sonny did not know if this outing was helping Nephice in a way that she had hoped it would, but he found it unexpectedly relaxing. Spending quality time with good friends was what normal humans were supposed to enjoy, after all. However, he had never had such an opportunity as a mundane. Sonny had never really fit into any of the groups he had tried to become a part of in the outskirts. He had always existed on their periphery before being expelled from them, as if something about him caused a subconscious rejection. He did not really know what had changed. Maybe it were the people he was with, or maybe it were the circumstances that had brought them together. Most likely, it was Sonny himself that had become different. In any case, for the first time in his life, he felt safe and secure about his place. He felt as if he truly belonged with these people. That did not mean that they were connected at the hip, of course. In fact, the members of the cohort had plenty of differences and underlying conflicts that had the potential to push them away from each other. Even the phrase itself was not exactly accurate. At this point, they were not really members of a distinct cohort anymore. Even if all five chose to pursue the same goal together, which was rather improbable, masters rarely operated in groups. They were too rare and powerful for such an arrangement. Most ascended acted independently, only gathering together to face especially terrible threats. But that was all right. This was how mature relationships were supposed to work. Sonny and his friends did not have to spend every waking minute together to preserve their bond. It was deep and tempered enough to remain strong even if each of them walked their separate path from now on. Still, the prospect of separation made Sonny feel wistful. He would have preferred for the five of them to stay together, at least in some capacity. However, the future was too obscure. Until the fateful ball, it was hard to say in which direction their lives would go. That was why this rare moment was so precious. Throwing all serious thoughts out of his mind, Sonny relaxed and tried to enjoy it as much as he could. Who knew when they would have a chance to spend such a peaceful evening together again, if ever? Steel was once again striking against steel in the underground dojo. Well, alloy was striking against alloy, to be more precise. For once, Sonny was not suffering on the receiving end of Changing Star's assault. The slender young woman was actually sitting on top of his inactive sleeping pod with her eyes closed, meditating as she controlled the soul essence rushing through her body. Instead, Sonny was defending himself against earnest, but amateurish attacks delivered by Rain. What a nice change of pace. The teenage girl was trying her best to get through his defense, but even when Sonny drastically toned down his speed and strength, her efforts were simply not enough. Despite her hard work, outstanding talent, and the swift improvement she had made, Rain was like an open book for him. Of course, he couldn't expect much from a mundane teenager. Still, her performance today was far from stellar. Sunny frowned. Concentrate. You are distracted. BVEC. Rain gritted her teeth and tried, but her mind was obviously elsewhere. A few minutes later, he was forced to command her to stop and stared at his pupil without dissatisfaction. Are you going to take it seriously or not? What is wrong with you today? Sunny knew that he had lucked out with his student. Unlike most teenagers, Rain had never given him any trouble with regard to her diligence and motivation. It was only natural for her to try and slack off eventually, but he had already gotten used to his sister giving it her all during their lessons. Now, nothing short of excellence would do. Rain breathed heavily, then threw a furtive glance at the alcove containing the sleeping pod and the dreamscape pod. His cheeks turned slightly red. Sorry. I can't. Lady Changing Star is here. Sunny scowled. What about her? The teenage girl looked at him with embarrassment and then said in a small voice. You don't get it. She's watching. Sunny blinked a couple of times and then stared at her in confusion. Her eyes are closed. And anyway, you can't fight properly because someone is watching. Are you kidding me? Do you think that battles happen in private or something? Rain shook her head. It's not just someone. It's the Changing Star. She is, you know. Famous. Sunny scratched the back of his head. I am famous too, you know. But look at Nephis. She is somewhat of my #1 fan, as it turns out, yet she is practicing diligently, without letting anything distract her. She is not starstruck at all. The teenage girl shook her head again. It's different. I know that you are a big deal. I am also used to seeing Effie and Lady Kasia. Even Night. But Lady Nephis is on a whole other level. She's not just a celebrity, she actually matters. She is one of the mostest people. Sunny glared at his little sister. Actually matters. Ouch. He sighed, then lowered his alloy stick and summoned the endless spring. I guess we're going to have a different kind of lesson today. Sunny put a hand on Rain's shoulder and pointed at Nephis. You're a smart kid, Rain. Your father works for the government. You should be able to separate truth from propaganda. Sure, Neph is an extraordinary individual, and she achieved a lot of incredible things. But she is just a human. All that stuff that is clouding your head is just an illusion that other humans created to shove an uplifting narrative down the population's throat. You can't be that gullible and believe in things that aren't real. The teenage girl remained silent for a bit, then frowned. But these things are real. Whether they are true or not, people believe in them. So they're real. Chapter 796 Real Deal. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Sunny tilted his head a little. What do you mean? Rain glanced at him and shrugged. It is because my father works for the government that I know this stuff. Well, let's say that millions of people believe that Lady Nephis is the hero that is going to lead humanity to conquer the fourth nightmare. It doesn't matter if she truly is. As long as people believe it, she has influence over them. Her image might be an illusion, but that influence is real. Which means that her power is also real. Do you understand? He stared at her in bewilderment. So, you are saying that just because someone decided to make Neph into a powerful hero and manipulated people into believing that she actually became one? Rain nodded. Think about it. If Lady Nephis decides to appear in public tomorrow and appeal for people to take arms and join the government army, tens of thousands of new recruits will answer the call. Maybe even hundreds of thousands. How can something that can affect hundreds of thousands of lives not be real? So, she is different from a celebrity like Knight, or a master like you. She is the real deal. Sunny scratched the back of his head. Why am I getting schooled by my student? About lies and deceit, of all things. The worst part of it was that Rain made a lot of sense. Power was an elusive concept, so was the difference between the real and the unreal. It was easy to point at an object and say that it was real. One could see it, touch it, and break it. But what about less tangible things? Was friendship real? Or love? Or belief, for example? If belief in something could affect millions of people, cause them to throw themselves into a war, persecute a group of individuals, or build incredible miracles of architecture, it was indeed stupid to say that the thing they believed in was not real. Since it was able to exert influence on the real world, the object of their belief stopped being an illusion and became something different. Something like a deity. Sunny frowned. What the hell am I thinking about? I was supposed to discipline my lazy student, not go on a philosophical tangent about the nature of divinity. It did not apply to actual gods, anyway. When they had been alive, the gods did not care about who believed in them and why. Why would they, if their power had been born long before humanity even existed? At that point, Nephis suddenly turned her head and said without opening her eyes. You talk too much. Keep swinging that sword, Rain. The teenage girl flinched and obediently raised her weapon. Yes, Lady Nephis. Sunny opened his mouth. Wait, who's the teacher here? Neph, meanwhile, lingered for a moment and added. The power you talk about might be real, but it is fragile and insubstantial. It can be broken just as easily as it was created, unless the person wielding it has actual strength to defend it. At the end of the day, nothing that has been handed to you is as valuable as what you have nurtured and cultivated yourself. So, don't slack off in your training. Her expression softened a little, and the corner of her mouth curved upward. You are doing very well already. Just continue practicing with the same determination. A bright smile suddenly appeared on Rain's face. Really? You really think so? Sunny said so, too. He said that I am way better than he was. Nephis slowly shook her head. Sunny did not have a systematic education and the solid foundation that you enjoy. He never had a proper teacher, let alone a personal tutor. And yet, he has achieved so much, in such a short time. You are far from his level, for now. Even if you catch up to his corresponding accomplishments, it won't be enough. With your background and advantages, the only acceptable result is to surpass them. Sunny scoffed. Yeah, no way that happens. Rain threw an angry look at him, and then said defensively. But I am not even a sleeper. I don't have a soul core and an aspect. I can't do what he did. Neph opened her eyes and looked at the teenage girl somberly. It doesn't matter if you are an awakened, a sleeper, or a mundane human. Chances are, you won't even be infected by the spell. That doesn't mean that you have an excuse to remain weak. In fact, that only makes your need to grow stronger more dire. She sighed. Most people in this world are mundane, and yet, they face the same dangers. I've known many brave individuals who did not possess supernatural strength or a powerful aspect. It takes a lot of courage to resist the tyranny of the spell without them. Those people might have not wielded weapons or fought on the front lines of this war, but they were more courageous than most awakened I've seen. And the impact they made was no less real. Nephis closed her eyes again and resumed cycling her essence. Strength is strength. Whether you become an awakened or not, you'll need it. So, train earnestly. Don't let my presence distract you. Sunny felt like he urgently needed to say something. He cleared his throat and looked at Rain solemnly. Yeah. This world is not kind to the weak. Well, you know this, wasn't that the reason you asked me to train you, in the first place? So, stop staring at Neph and get to work. The teenage girl hesitated for a few moments, and then bowed. Thank you, Grand Teacher. Sunny ground his teeth. What? Why don't I get a thank you? What the hell? The alloy stick in his hand came to life, shooting forward to strike Rain on the shoulder. However, the girl had not let down her guard. Reacting with surprising speed, she sidestepped his attack and deflected the stick with her training sword, then counterattacked. Sunny almost got hit in the nose. He hid his surprise and continued pressuring his student. Well, whatever just happened appears to have worked. Rain did not seem distracted anymore, at least. Chapter 797 Different Side. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. On a cold winter morning, two people were making their way through the black slush that drowned a rundown street, piling high near the dirty walls of the cheap panel buildings that clung to each other, as if for warmth. The loud sound of their steps echoed in the dim twilight, making it seem as if a monster was chewing on rotten flesh. Nephice glanced at the dirt covering her expensive boots, then smelled the air and grimaced. Adjusting the collar of her white coat, she then glanced at Sunny and asked, "Why are we here, exactly?" He shoved his hands into his pockets and shrugged. "Weren't you told to submerge yourself into how mundane humans live? Well, here we are. This is life, too." He gestured at the ugly landscape that surrounded them and sighed. After several years, Sunny was back in the outskirts. Brings back memories. In the aftermath of the collapse of old humanity, ravages of war and natural cataclysms made most of the planet uninhabitable. To exist in relative safety, people had to congregate in large cities like the one he had grown up in, the Northern Quadrant siege capital. Everywhere else was either drowned underwater or looked like a desert. Of course, life persisted. Some trees and plants were still clinging to life. Large mammals mostly went extinct, but a few species of animals and insects had managed to adapt. However, the damage to most ecosystems was too severe. The earth turned barren, the water turned poisonous, and even the air itself was not safe to breathe anymore. Luckily, humans had technology to help them survive. The city incorporated sophisticated water filtration systems, food distribution infrastructure and other means of keeping the population alive. It was surrounded by tall barrier walls that prevented excessive microdust, various toxins, stray remnants of weaponized bacteria, harmful radiation, and other hazards from getting into the air supply. Sunny did not know much about how the barriers worked, but they were sufficiently effective in keeping the city in a bubble of breathable air. Of course, each district also possessed its own additional means of purifying the air even further. The problem, however, was that the barriers were stationary, while the city was not. The human population across the planet had dropped, but here in NQSC, it was slowly growing. As a result, the city grew, too. It stretched further and further, both into the sky and underground. Of course, it also sprawled horizontally. Eventually, the city had outgrown the circle of barriers. Hence, the outskirts appeared. Although there were new barrier walls in construction, their completion required vast amounts of funding, human resources, and even more time. The colossal, skeletal frames of unfinished barriers had loomed above the outskirts for as long as Sunny could remember, unfinished. With what he knew now, he doubted that they would ever be completed at all. In any case, whole generations of people like him had already lived and died outside their protection. The air in the outskirts might not have been as bad as in the desolate wilderness beyond, but it was far from safe. Those who breathed it every day did not tend to enjoy good health or long lives. It reeked. Breathing in the familiar stench, Sunny struggled not to follow Neff's example and grimace. He had been accustomed to the smell for most of his life and never paid it much attention, but just a few years of sweet life in the dream realm and in the better parts of the city made it seem rather intense. What's the big deal? It's not that bad in winter, anyway. Just like the air, all other facets of life in the outskirts were barely suited for human life, as well. The buildings were straining to keep themselves together, clean water was scarce, most food came in the form of synth-paste rations provided by the government. Everything was dirty, worn out, and on the verge of collapse. The infrastructure barely functioned. Theoretically, there was supposed to be a working transportation system with connections to the rest of the city, but in practice, it broke down and malfunctioned so often that getting anywhere with its help was hard. That was the reason why Sonny and Nephice were currently on foot. He did not regret this turn of events, however, because that gave them the chance to get a good look at people who lived in the outskirts. Just like the slums themselves, the inhabitants looked decrepit. They were all frail, thin, and with unhealthy skin. The most striking difference was their height. People who lived in the outskirts were much shorter than those who lived in the inner city, mostly due to malnourishment and sickness. In short, they all looked similar to how Sonny had been before the first nightmare. Looking at them now, he couldn't help but think of his past. Only 3 years and a few months ago, he had left this place, thinking that he would never return. But Sonny was already a very different person. He saw the familiar sights differently, too. This is so strange. Sonny had always thought of himself as someone from the outskirts, but now, after traveling through several regions of the dream realm and building a life for himself in the city, Sonny suddenly understood that the outskirts were not a monolithic place. They were actually vast and encompassed numerous different areas. He had only ever known and explored a small part of them. The only world he had known for most of his life was even smaller than he had thought. How could it not be so? Sonny had never considered such things, but after his last conversation with Master Jet, he realized the true scope of it all. From what she had told him, there were somewhere between 60 and 70 million people living in the outskirts. 20% of the total population of the city existed in these unpleasant conditions, barely surviving as they were slowly ground to dust. If the mass evacuation from Antarctica succeeded, that number was going to grow even further. The outskirts were much greater than Sonny had ever thought. More than that, every city that remained on Earth had its own version of them, even if the excess population of NQSC was by far the largest. Thinking about all the struggle, misery, and desperate hope that surrounded him, Sonny sighed. People were people. Even in this pit, they found ways to adapt and find moments of happiness. They never lost their motivation to live and seek purpose. It's just that those moments were rare, and their lives were usually on the shorter side. His family had not been unhappy, until it was destroyed. People more lucky than him could have a semblance of a decent life even in the outskirts, although their chances were slim. Nephice grew silent, observing the inhabitants of the outskirts with her usual distant expression. However, there was a hint of emotion hiding deep in her eyes. After a while, she turned to Sonny and asked, "Are we here to just walk around?" He looked forward, then shook his head. "No. We came here for a reason." Chapter 798 Lonely Tree. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Soon, the narrow street they were walking on made way for a small lot. Spaces like these were not rare in the outskirts, since no one really bothered with city planning here. The mess of streets and alleys grew chaotically, with many of them being nothing but an accidental result of tall buildings, factories, and massive human hives being constructed in close proximity to each other. As a result, there were plenty of random gaps like this one around. What made the empty lot special, however, was that it had somehow turned into a small park. Greenery was exceedingly rare in the outskirts, which made the park especially precious. The modest space in front of them was currently covered by dirty snow, but come spring, patches of real grass were going to appear from beneath it. There were a few bushes, a frozen pond, and a lonely tree that somehow clung to life despite all reason. Currently, it stood bare and dark, devoid of the bright crown of its leaves. The park was surrounded by tall buildings, making it seem as if it was situated on the bottom of a deep well. Sparse sunlight fell on the tree from far above, illuminating its thin branches and the gray snowflakes that swirled in the air around them. There were several clean pathways through the snow, as well as a few damaged and vandalized benches here and there. Several people were sitting on the benches, enjoying a quiet moment of respite. They gave the young woman dressed in white and the young man dressed in black uneasy looks. Nephi studied the park for a few moments, then glanced at Sunny. Aren't you wary that something can happen? He took a look at her, then at himself. Both were obviously out of place, considering their physical appearance and expensive clothes. Everything about them screamed of wealth, status, and citizenship. Sunny doubted that the inhabitants of the outskirts would recognize them as ascended, but they would inevitably come to the conclusion that the strangers were rich. He shrugged. What can happen? Even if some idiots decide to try and rob us, the worst they can do is shoot at us with cheap firearms. I doubt that their bullets can bruise our skin, let alone penetrate it. One would have to use a heavy assault vehicle with state-of-the-art magnetic cannon, or better yet a Spelltech armament, to leave a small scratch on the body of a master. Even then, landing a shot would not be easy. Nephi shook her head. I'm not worried about us. I'm worried about the idiots. Sunny smiled. Well, don't be. If there is one thing we outskirt rats are good at, it's self-preservation. Anyone can see that both of us are killers. They'll stay away. Changing Star gave him a hesitant nod. A few moments later, she asked. So what is the reason? He lingered for a moment, then shrugged. I met your mother already. So I thought I would bring you to meet mine. Nephi raised an eyebrow. I thought your mother was dead. Sunny nodded. She is. Come. He headed toward the tree, knowing that Neph would follow. As they approached, Sunny sighed and said in a neutral tone. Most people in the outskirts don't get to have a burial, so there are no graves either. Space is a precious commodity, energy and fuel are, too. Human remains are usually dissolved, and then discarded. Still, it is nice to have a special place to remember them by. This tree is such a place for me. A long time ago, I carved 2 lines into it, one for my mom, and one for my dad. He stopped and stared at the tree, a distant expression appearing on his face. In truth, Sunny had been thinking about his mother a lot recently, and that prompted him to visit the small park. Taking Nephi along was just an afterthought. He had decided that showing her the hidden side of the city would do her some good. It could give her perspective, at least. As they stood silently under the tree, Nephi studied it for a while, and then suddenly said. There are 3 lines. Sunny looked at her in confusion. What? Neph pointed to the bottom of the trunk. There is a 3rd line. He stared at her for a moment, then turned away. Oh. The 3rd line is for me. I added it before going away to face the first nightmare. Changing Star glanced at him, then asked in her usual even tone. Were you not confident of conquering it? Sunny laughed. Gods, no. I was pretty sure that I would die. I was ready to, actually. Back then. I was sort of ambivalent about life, I guess. Very few people from the outskirts survive their nightmares. We are physically weak and less educated than proper citizens. Local schools are not exactly known for training skilled fighters. He remained silent for a moment, and then added. It's weird, actually. A large part of why I survived the first nightmare was exactly because I did not really care to survive. Since I already accepted that I would die, I did not worry too much about anything. No matter what happened, I was able to calmly react instead of panicking. I acted with unrestrained coldness and calculation. Sunny sighed. Of course, such an attitude is of limited utility. It helped me at the start, but one can't get far by acting like a walking corpse. It was only halfway through the nightmare that I suddenly decided that I wanted to live. And once I did. I really, really wanted to live. That was what pushed me to go on despite all reason, and eventually escape. He looked at the lonely tree, lingered, and said. I haven't been back here since. When I was carving the 3rd line for myself, I had no idea that I would return one day as a master, let alone one with the special strategic asset designation and enough value to make both the government and the great clans fight over me. Sunny shook his head and grinned. What a strange turn of events, huh? Chapter 799 Outskirt Rat. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. They stood silently under the tree for a while. Eventually, Nephice looked at him and said evenly, "You did well." Sunny glanced at her with a pale smile, then nodded. "I guess I did, didn't I? My mom would have been very happy. If she was alive, that is. I am healthy, well-fed, and have a house in a good part of the city. I even found a student. These things might not sound like much to you, but to her, they would have been like a dream." He turned to the tree and added after a short pause. "I don't really remember my dad too well, because I was too little when he passed away. But my mom, I remember her perfectly. She was, like a ray of sunshine. The strangest thing, though, is that when I was a kid, she was the whole world to me. I thought that she knew everything, could do anything. But now, I realize that she was barely older than we are. She was more or less a kid herself." Nephice looked at him and said, "But we aren't kids." Sunny tilted his head, then shrugged. "That is true, I guess. We are adults, which is a strange thought. I don't really feel very different from how I was before, at least not in terms of being confident and knowing what the hell I am doing." Changing Star sighed, then shook her head a little. "That is because you have been an adult for a long time. People like us have to grow up early." Sunny thought about it for a moment. "I don't know. I have a suspicion that when I look back on today in a decade or so, I will be dismayed by how big of an idiot I was." Nephice smiled with the corner of her mouth. "That has nothing to do with adulthood." He spared her a short glance and scoffed. "That was the point where you were supposed to say that I am not an idiot, you know." She stared at him with a deadpan expression, then said in her usual tone, "I know." Sunny couldn't help but laugh. "Anyway, I don't really understand why I wanted to come here. I guess I expected to feel something, and I do. It's just not what I thought I wows feel." Nephice lingered for a few moments. Eventually, he said with a hint of hesitation in her voice, "Do you maybe want to say something to your mother?" Sunny lingered for a while, then shook his head. "What is the point? She is dead, and the dead can't hear anything. They are simply gone. They only exist in the memories of the past. I would rather concentrate on the future." Despite the fact that he had achieved many things that his mother would have wanted for him, it had not been without a cost. His house, his wealth, and the fridge full of food he had back home were only one side of his life. The other side was full of dire things like the sovereigns, the obel scale, and Nephice. His bond with her was a dire thing, too. His future was not cloudless at all. The past few weeks had been some of the calmest and most enjoyable in Sunny's life. He had mostly been in Neff's company, doing nothing but training and spending time with her. He had hidden his head in the sand and refused to think about all the troubles that loomed on the horizon. That pleasant time was coming to an end. In a few days, Nephice was going to finally leave to face the Fire Keepers. About a week after that, they were going to accept Clan Valor's invitation and attend their ball. After that, everything was going to change. Their futures were going to be decided on that day. Sunny found himself standing at a crossroad, not knowing where any of the roads actually led. Even worse, he was not the only one making the decision on what turn to take. All of it was so tiresome. He sighed, then walked over to the tree and touched it for a brief moment. "Hey, Mom. It's me. I am doing well, I guess. Rain is well, too. She looks like you very much. You would have been really proud of her." Sunny felt rather stupid at that moment, but at the same time, strangely soothed. He hesitated for a few seconds, and then thought. "Anyway, I don't think I will be able to visit again for a long time. Not that you're really here. Oh, that young woman right there is Nephis. She is well, it's complicated. In any case, I think you would have liked her. I have several other friends, too. So I am in good hands. You don't have to worry about me. With that, he stepped back, looked at the lonely tree one last time, and turned away. Let's go. As they walked away, Neff looked at him and asked tentatively. Are you all right? Sunny smiled crookedly and shrugged. Of course. Why wouldn't I be? She opened her mouth to say something, but at that moment, several figures suddenly appeared from behind a corner, surrounding them. They were all dirty and disheveled, looking like typical outskirts thugs. The leader, a muscular man with a chemical scar on his face, pointed a kinetic handgun at them and grinned. Not so fast, lovebirds. Rich kids like you really should think twice before coming to where you don't belong. Sunny silently palmed his face. So why don't you give us your communicators and other valuables, before something bad happens? Damn it. This is so embarrassing. Before the thug was done speaking, Sunny appeared near him, grabbed the barrel of his gun and squeezed gently, turning it into a deformed steel pancake. The muscular man stared at his weapon in shock, then suddenly let go of it and jumped back. Awakened. Run. The thugs all froze for a second, then paled and dashed away, disappearing as fast as they had appeared a few moments ago. Sunny was left standing with a broken gun in his hand. He sighed heavily, then threw it into a rusty trash container that stood a couple dozen meters away. The gun clanked against its edge as it disappeared inside. Unbelievable. The most disheartening thing about it all was that he knew the leader of the thugs. Growing up in this area of the outskirts, Sunny had run into this particular gang more than once, something being mistreated by them, something running small errands for the thugs in hopes of earning some food. And yet, none of them had recognized him, instead mistaking Sunny for a rich city kid. He looked at Nephis and cleared his throat. Sorry about that. She shook her head. No need to apologize. Sunny hesitated for a moment, then shrugged and continued walking away from the park. I guess I am really not an outskirt rat anymore. Chapter 800 Facing the Music. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. A few days passed in pleasant tranquility. Eventually, however, the time ran out. Nephis gathered her things and left for the Immortal Flame Manor, leaving Sunny alone. It was a bittersweet feeling. Sweet because he finally had the house for himself once again. Bitter because, well, Sunny was not sure that he enjoyed his home being so empty anymore. Nevertheless, he had chosen not to follow her to join the rest of the cohort yet. Sunny felt like the looming ball was going to change a lot of things, and had to prepare a few contingencies. If the worst happened, there was a big possibility that he would be gone for a very long time again. There were several things he had to do, just in case. His lecture course at the academy had just started, but at this rate, it was under threat of ending prematurely. Sunny spent some time imparting his students with the best and most essential knowledge he could relay in such a short amount of time, but other than that, there was not much else he could do to prevent his academic reputation from potentially receiving a hit. Luckily, all masters led hectic lives. The administration was long accustomed to their star lecturers disappearing for months on end without much of a warning, so his case was not unique. His second worry was the brilliant Emporium. The memory store was already in a difficult position because of the invisible blockade that had prevented Sunny from visiting the dream realm and hunting down nightmare creatures for half a year. Their inventory was running low. In the past 6 months, Sunny had slowly shifted his business in the direction of selling memory versions of mundane items that he weaved. That was not a straightforward endeavor, however. Sure, the idea of having a toothbrush memory sounded pleasant, but he had to use a soul shard to create one. Considering how expensive soul shards were in the real world, the price of a simple toothbrush would have been simply unreasonable. So, after thinking for a while, Sunny had come up with a strategy of shifting his focus from necessities and toiletries to luxury items. That way, he could price them high enough to earn more than the price of a soul shard. Rich clients already had access to mundane items in the dream realm due to their connections to masters and saints, but were willing to pay a lot for the convenience of having various luxuries readily at hand. So, Sunny spent a few days painstakingly creating an especially large batch of these extravagant memories and then met with Aiko to transfer them. After thinking for a while, he gave her a strange set of instructions. Sunny wanted the brilliant emporium to stock up on as many memories that provided either warmth or resistance against cold as possible. The second priority went to memories that could serve as a source of light, which were usually cheap and plentiful. He also told Aiko to sell every soul shard they had left. The reason behind this decision was simple: the approaching disaster in Antarctica. Once the government announced the voluntary mobilization, a lot of people were going to need to equip themselves for the harsh realities of polar night. The large amount of opening gates would also flood the market with soul shards, probably crashing their price to a certain extent. In any case, he hoped that the brilliant emporium would survive for a while thanks to these measures, should something happen at the ball. Lastly, there was Rain. His sister was going to turn 16 in a few months, which meant that Sunny had very little time left to prepare her for the potential first nightmare. On the other hand, there were not a lot of things left that he could teach her. Of course, Rain still had a lot of room to improve, but at that stage, Sunny's presence was only of marginal use. What she really needed to do was to truly internalize and assimilate the skills and knowledge that he had already imparted to her. While Sunny could help his sister along, most of the work had to be done by Rain herself. Still, he used the week before the ball to the fullest extent. The teenage girl might have been sour about how intense their lessons suddenly became, but it was for her own good. She was already better prepared to face the nightmare than he had been, by far. Whether or not that would be enough, he did not know. Other than these three things, there was not a lot for Sunny to do. He prepared his home to go into conservation mode in case he did not return from the ball. He restocked the covetous coffer with various supplies for a long expedition. He fought against Saint to clean the rust off his battle instincts. He tinkered with his memories for a bit, trying to improve them. All of these preparations might have been for nothing, but Sunny was more willing to be wrong than to be unprepared. Finally, the fateful day came. Wincing at the thought of how much money he had spent on that thing, Sunny donned a stylish black suit and briefly looked at himself in the mirror. The bespoke attire had been made by a luxury establishment that serviced many prominent legacies and incorporated the most rare and durable materials, many of them coming from the dream realm. The suit was made in the style that many awakened preferred, existing somewhere between the modern fashion and the more antiquated aesthetic that memories adhered to. It was elegant and fitting, including a stylish half cape and tall leather boots. Even though Sunny had said a few strong words to Kai during the fittings, now that he looked at himself, he could not deny that he looked rather good. Sunny lingered for a few moments, then sighed. "Let's face the music, I guess." With that, he briefly circulated essence through the coils of Soul Serpent, wrapped 3 of the 4 shadows around his body, and walked outside. His carriage, in the form of a luxury PTV, was already waiting.